I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster. And I don't have to do it for the election. I've already done a lot of wall for the election, 2020. And the only reason we're up here talking about this is because of the election.
President Trump making his emergency declaration to build a border wall earlier this morning. Let's bring in White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Great to have you on the Daily Briefing on this great day, on a Friday, where it's nice there in Washington, D.C., and the president was able to be in the Rose Garden today, took a lot of questions from the press. Critics of his seizing on this line that I didn't need to do this in regards to the national emergency, and some saying that that will be the opening line of every legal complaint that goes forward. How will you deal with that as press secretary?
Look, I think the biggest thing is that he shouldn't have to do this. Congress should have stepped up and done their jobs and done everything necessary to fully and safely secure the border. The president could have waited and he could have drugged this out. The bill allows for 55 new miles of wall, which is a great step forward, and it is certainly a down payment on the wall, but it doesn't finish the job. And the president is somebody who wants to complete the job, he wants to finish the job, and he wants to stop illegal immigrants and drugs and trafficking from coming across the border, and he knows that you have to have a wall in order to do that. He doesn't want to drag this out over the course of the next several years. He wants to get the funding now so we can stop this national security and humanitarian crisis at the border and take care of it.
I was remembering, of course, people have played the clip that President Trump was quite critical of President Obama years ago, but I wondered if he's found, now that he's in the Oval Office, he's realized that working with Congress is kind of a pain in the rear, and they might have something in common now.
I'm sure that they can probably find a little bit of common ground in the fact that Congress can certainly be difficult to work with. But the difference between President Trump and President Obama is apples and oranges. What President Obama did in 2014 was he completely ignored the Constitution. He violated federal law by opening up the borders, by having mass amnesty, and even providing benefits to illegal immigrants. What the president is doing is actually fulfilling his constitutional duty, fulfilling the oath that he took as president of the United States to protect the people of this country, to secure our country. And there's a very big difference between what the two actions these individuals have done. They're actually opposite when you compare them, and so it's just totally different circumstances.
What about the concern from some that say that this could set a terrible precedent in the future? And I thought of former Senator Harry Reid, who basically used the nuclear option on confirmations, and that has led to President Trump being able to confirm two very conservative Supreme Court nominees, and there's a legacy issue there. Any concern on that point?
I think the president is going to have an incredible legacy. He's had an amazing 2 years already, historic first 2 years in office, and I think his next 6 years are going to be equally impactful. And I think that the two Supreme Court justices are something that are going to be one of the biggest and best parts of the president's legacy, and certainly one of the most lasting, and something he should never apologize for is pushing forward. The sad part is that he had to do that. He shouldn't have to do that in order to put people. He is the duly elected president of the United States. 63 million Americans came out and supported him and said, I want this person, this man, to choose who the next Supreme Court justice is, who the federal judges are. I want this person to be able to make decisions and impact the day-to-day life of these people.
I totally get it. My point only was that Harry Reid had made a decision that now has come back to bite the Democrats, and they have to deal with that. I also wanted to ask you about this because I thought it was very interesting the way the president answered a question about conservatives having, I think, perhaps over-exaggerated influence on the president. This just in from Ann Coulter. This is a tweet from her just now, about an hour ago. She says, this is not Paul Ryan's fault. It's not Mitch McConnell's fault. Trump ran against the GOP and won. Responsibility is 100% his. Do you think the media over-exaggerates the influence that somebody like Ann Coulter has on the White House?
I don't think Ann Coulter has any influence over this White House or influence over much of anything, to be honest. I don't think she did before the president became the president, and I don't think she does now. I just don't see her as being an influential voice in this country, and certainly not one in this building.
Does the president have a plan to deal with the difficulties that eminent domain could put in front of him as this national emergency goes forward, tries to build the wall? There's a lot of private citizens there, a lot of private property. Does he have a plan for that?
Certainly, he's going to continue working with the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, as well as White House counsel, who will be handling those issues. We feel very comfortable about where we are. And again, we know that the president certainly has the constitutional authority to make this type of declaration, and we feel very good about where we are in the process.
Take a listen to what the president said. Of course, you were there, but I just want to play it for the viewers about drugs and the death penalty.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Our criminalist, a drug dealer, gets a thing called, how about a fine? And when I asked President Xi, I said, you have a drug problem? No, no, no. I said, you have 1.4 billion people. What do you mean you have no drug problem? No, we don't have a drug problem. I said, why? Death penalty.
Okay, so the president just did a pretty amazing thing with the First Step Act, and that was helping a lot of people in our country be able to resolve their problems with the justice system because of drug penalties that they had to pay. Is the president actually going to put forward anything that would change our laws on this issue?
Legislation or executive action the president would take on that front. I think the point he's making is that we have to be tough. We can't allow people who bring in mass quantities of things like fentanyl who can wipe out an entire community. They picked up at the border just within the last few weeks enough fentanyl that would kill 50 million Americans. I mean, that is an unbelievable just travesty in the fact that those people are allowed to go free in some cases or not be able to be detained for long stretches of time. I think that type of thing is something the president wants to look at, and he certainly wants to be tough on those people.
Can I do one other question, not about the national emergency? I want to ask you about Amazon. New York, that's President Trump's home state. Amazon was going to bring 25,000 jobs to Long Island City. They decided to pull out of that yesterday. Governor Cuomo blamed Mayor de Blasio. Amazon blamed unnamed politicians. New York looks like it's hostile to big business coming in and creating jobs. Does the president have a view on this?
Look, I haven't spoken with him directly about that process. I know the president is somebody who loves companies who are creating jobs, and that's certainly a good thing. He's created an environment that has made that possible, which is why we've seen such a massive influx in the number of people that have gone back to work, and we have now more jobs open for people who actually want to work than we've had in decades. So that's something certainly the president supports, but I'm not going to get in the middle of a squabble of Democrat New York politics right now, but I think it'll be fun to watch those folks battle it out for sure.
I know. I used to try to avoid Texas politics as much as possible. All right, Sarah Sanders, thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.
You bet. Thanks, Dana.
President Trump says he is declaring a national emergency to build a border wall because of what he calls an invasion from the south. The president made that declaration official this morning. The president conceding he will be sued, but is predicting success eventually. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has the story tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. White House officials tell Fox News that attorneys spent weeks going through all of the ins and outs of an emergency declaration to make sure that the president would be on solid ground today. Still, he stirred up a hornet's nest. With a stroke of his executive pen, President Trump today invited what may be the biggest challenge to his executive power yet.
We're talking about an invasion of our country with drugs, with human traffickers, with all types of criminals and gangs.
In total, President Trump is looking at $8 billion to build his border wall, $1.37 billion from the DHS appropriation, $601 million from the Treasury Department's forfeiture fund, $2.5 billion from the Pentagon's drug interdiction program, including $2.2 billion that will be reprogrammed from other areas of the Pentagon, and $3.6 billion from the military construction budget. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi ripped the president for raiding the Pentagon budget to build a wall, in a joint statement saying the president's unlawful declaration over a crisis that does not exist does great violence to our Constitution and makes America less safe, stealing from urgently needed defense funds for the security of our military and our nation. The president today insisted moving the money would not hurt the military.
We had certain funds that are being used at the discretion of generals, at the discretion of the military. Some of them haven't been allocated yet. and some of the generals think that this is more important.
In making his case, President Trump today pointed to dozens of emergency declarations that never drew the type of fire he's receiving. But those declarations weren't used as a way to go around Congress on appropriations. The president also gave his critics more ammunition today when he seemed to indicate the emergency declaration wasn't necessary.
I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster. And I don't have to do it for the election. I've already done a lot of wall.
Socialist firebrand Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she'd introduce legislation to block the president, tweeting, "Joaquin Castro, Texas, and I aren't going to let the president declare a fake national emergency without a fight." A congressional fight may be the least of the president's worries. White House officials, even the president, openly acknowledge their attempt to reprogram military money will land them in court.
They will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there, and we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court.
The words had barely escaped the president's lips when the ACLU announced that it would sue the president. And Democrats on the House Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee, today sent a letter to the White House saying that they wanted to investigate the president's emergency declaration and asked the White House to make officials from both here and the Department of Justice available for the hearings. Brett?
More on this with the panel. John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thanks.